Hello, everyone, and welcome to Or This. This is my Monday morning quarterbacking of the scriptures in the sermon for the previous Sunday. And this video is looking at the scriptures and sermon from Sunday, March 27th. The scriptures for the day were from Joshua, chapter 5, verses 9 through 12, Psalm 32, 2 Corinthians 5, verse 16 to 21, and Luke 15, verses 1 through 3, and 11b, verse 32. The gospel includes the parable of the prodigal son, and that was the main point of the sermon that I preached this past weekend. But in this, and what I did in the sermon was try to place the parable in the context in which it was spoken, in the way, and demonstrate how Jesus used what was happening in the current moment as a teaching moment in which he told the parable. But for today, for this video at least, I wanted to share something that it just popped into my head. And one of the things we can do with a parable, especially a parable like the prodigal son, is just listen to the parable and then talk about the parts of it that resonate with our experience, because that's what stories are meant for. Stories are not always necessarily meant to say, well, this equals this and this lines up with this perfectly, and that there's some way to read it that's absolutely correct 100% of the time. But instead, it's a way to invite us into reflection on how our stories connect with this particular story. And then when we hear the story at other times, we might connect with it at a different point. So I literally just looked at this and thought about this before the video. In the passage after the son takes his inheritance and goes, and then he ends up squandering it, and then there's a famine and he doesn't have anything, and so he's out with tending to the pigs and admiring their dinner because he doesn't have anything, and then realizes he could go back as a hired hand for his father and have food enough to eat. So he returns reciting what it is that he's going to say to his father. And the line that I just read and thought about was, while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. While he was still far off is what connected, what made what I kind of started thinking about. The idea that sometimes we feel as though we are far off from God. Sometimes we might feel as though God is very far away from us. Sometimes we feel like maybe our lives are out of God's view, and that, God really isn't paying attention to what we're doing, doesn't really see what's going on. And when I hear this phrase, while he was still far off, his father saw him. And it made me think that it doesn't matter how far away, how far off from God's view we think we might be. God sees us. And especially at times when we're looking for some source of help and support and love, if God sees us slugging along, like bearing burdens and just really struggling, God sees us and God brings us God's love. Comes running and brings God's love into our lives. And so it doesn't matter how far off we might think we might be. We are not outside of God's view, because God is looking for us, looking to see how we're doing, looking to see what we're doing. God looks for God's children because God loves us. And God looks for those opportunities to support us and to share God's love with us and to strengthen us with that love and with faith in the midst of our life's struggles. So, a very basic line of this whole parable: while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. That speaks to me today. So I wonder what is there a phrase in the parable that speaks to you, that either when you heard it in worship, if you're at worship, or if you read through the parable now, is there a phrase or a part of the story that speaks to you today, this week? I invite you to share that, if you would like, in the comments, either here on YouTube or on Facebook. But know that a lot of our faith is about stories, and about telling stories, and about finding the ways in which our stories connect with those stories, and then seeing the ways in which God is involved in those stories. And it's a reminder that God is involved in our stories and helps write those stories, especially the stuff about love and peace and faith and hope and strength and compassion. So thank you for watching, and please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and God bless.